Our speaker today is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, a former jet pilot and a combat veteran with 74 successful missions over Vietnam. In addition, he helped start the Top Gun School in Miramar, California. On his 75th mission, just 5 days before he was scheduled to return home, Captain Plumb was shot down over enemy territory. He ejected from his F-4 Phantom jet, parachuted into enemy hands, was taken prisoner, tortured, and survived nearly 6 years in communist prison camps. He's returned to share his story of winning through adversity to more than 4,500 audiences in this country and around the world. To get a better feel of how the saga began, let us travel back to May the 19th, 1967, to the other side of the world.
Stay coming that away if you can. Button up and move southbound. We're coming apart! I can't control it!
The prison cell that I was in Vietnam was 8 feet long and 8 feet wide. I could pace 3 steps in one direction before I ran into a wall, turn around, pace 3 steps the other way. Inside my new little home, I had nothing to do. I had no books to read, no window to look out, no TV, telephone, BlackBerry, Bluetooth. I didn't have a pencil or a piece of paper. For 2,103 days, just 3 steps one way and 3 steps the other. And I think the most value I can be to the Breakfast Club, the most value I can be to you, personally and professionally, in the few minutes we're together, is to invite you into my little prison cell. There's a great deal to be learned in this little classroom. So for the next few moments, I'd like for you to try your best to smell the stench of that 2-gallon bucket in the corner I call my toilet. I'd like you to try to feel the baking heat of a tropical summer in a tin-roof prison cell 10,000 miles away from the good life. I'd like for you to try to taste the salt, the annoying taste of salt in the corners of your mouth from the sweat and the tears and the blood. Not that you'll ever be prisoners of war, God forbid. But if I do my job this morning, you'll see where the same kinds of challenges you and I are facing daily. With the pandemic, in the lockdown, with the kids, with the customers. The same challenges that you and I face on a daily basis, the very challenges that I faced in that prison cell. And more importantly, your response to the challenge, if you're going to succeed, has to be the same recipe of responses I used over there just to survive. And if this is already too great a stretch for you, if you're already having trouble bridging this gap in time and geography between my life experience and yours, the best I can offer you is an interesting war story. But here's the connect. Here is the touch point. Here perhaps is a reason your life and mine intersected on Veterans Day 2020. There's not a person in this club or visitor who has not, in the last few weeks or months, felt overwhelmed and underappreciated. Not a person here who hasn't had trouble communicating, even with those you love the most. Not a person here who hasn't had those inner fears, of inadequacy. Am I really going to measure up? Is this really going to work? And there's not a person here who has not, in the last few weeks or months, had your very baseline value system challenged. So once you get the hang of this, okay, put aside your comfort zone just for a minute. It won't hurt much, okay? Step into a dingy little prison cell a long way from home. And when you have that feel, I have a couple of questions I want to ask. Here's the first one. How do you survive this? What kind of stuff do you have in your gut? What kind of tools do you have in your psychological toolbox you'd apply to a problem like this? Okay, question number two, since we're all members here, what about the guys next door? What about those prisoners of war in that cell next to yours, guys that are clinging to life by their fingernails and they're in a world of hurt and they need your help, but they don't trust you. They think you have some kind of hidden agenda. How do you get through to them? Well, the first thing you learn in a prison cell is pain. You learn a lot about pain. Second thing, you might not suspect this. The second thing you learn in a prison cell is, well, the seconds start wearing into the minutes. It takes forever for the first few minutes to wear into the hours, then hours into days, days into months, and months into years, and you acclimate. You learn how to breathe deeply and think about things far away, sunny beaches, warm breezes, thoughts of home. And you know what happens? You get used to this. You really do. In fact, you get so comfortable in your little prison cell that the last place you want to go is outside the cell because it's dark and lonely out here. At least you know the devil in the light. Here's what happens. You get a restriction built up. It's not the 8 feet between the walls. It's the 8 inches between your ears. You're in a mental box. Ever been in one of those mental boxes? Mm-hmm. Does your family get there? Do your kids get there? We all, I'm convinced the mental boxes of our lives can be more restrictive than those walls of stone and steel that I was behind. But I don't mind telling you this. It didn't take me very many miles on that floor. I was going nuts. I was right on the edge. And I said to myself, Charlie, if you're going to survive this, you're going to have to keep your mind and body active. Make up something to do. Maybe a little game to play. I thought that's what I'll do. I'll make a little deck of cards, and I did. I constructed a little deck of playing cards about the size of postage stamps. I tore these cards from 52 little strips of toilet paper, and I can tell you this with authority. Toilet paper is tough to shuffle. Hey, breakfast clubbers, what a treat it is to be with you. Wow, I've heard of this outfit for many, many years, as Frippy and I go back a long way. And what a pleasure it is just to listen to some of your stories and get to know each of you a little bit better. What a bright crew. And General Rocco, a pleasure to be with you this morning, sir. I'm a member of the Marine Corps Memorial and have spent several nights up there in San Francisco. Nice accommodation, sir. I wonder if they still have that bulldog there at the front desk. No, it's not the reception. It's a real bulldog.
We have 3 of them, not to interrupt. Come on back. We'd love to see you.
Okay, it's a deal. And what a group, of happy Veterans Day to Bill and Mike and Reg. Wow, what an experience. Your dad. I have known over the years some of these Tuskegee Airmen. In fact, I fly a plane. I have an antique airplane that the Tuskegee Airmen trained in many, many years ago. It's a PT-19 Fairchild. I bet your dad flew that one. Jim, Sydney, all of you guys and gals that have been in the military, and especially in combat. But here's the deal, you civilians. I don't think you have to fly an airplane or carry a rifle to serve your country. I believe that you can serve your country by serving those who have served their country. By teaching Sunday school or volunteering, you know, in your community. By talk to the kids next door, wave the flag, let them know that they love America like we do. General, I thought that was really impressive. I've been back to Vietnam too, and it is true. 95% of all the Vietnamese love Americans. I wish we could have even half of that number in our country who love America. Okay, back to the prison scene. There I was, trying to endure through this experience. A high-flying jet fighter pilot, Top Gun. I helped start the school. And suddenly in 90 seconds, I went from king of the skies to scum of the earth. How do you handle that? Well, you have to keep your parachute packed. Let me explain that. I sat down in a restaurant in Kansas City not so long ago. Well, it's been several years ago now, but it was after I came back from Vietnam. I used to live in Kansas City. About 2 tables over, a guy kept looking at me. I caught his eye, but I didn't recognize this gent. He stood up. He walked over to our table. He pointed at me and he said, "You're Captain Plumb." I looked up and I said, "Yes, sir, I'm Captain Plumb." "You're that guy. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam, aircraft carrier, F-4 Phantoms, shot down, parachuted in enemy hands. You spent 6 years as a prisoner of war." Somewhat dumbfounded, I looked up at this guy and I said, "How in the world did you know that?" He finally broke into a smile and he said, "Because I packed your parachute." Tell you this, for the guy that runs around the country making speeches, suddenly I was speechless. Best I could do was stagger to my feet, reach out a very grateful hand of thanks. He came up with just the proper words. The guy grabbed my hand, he pumped my arm, and he said, "I guess it worked." I said, "Yes, sir, indeed it did." And I said a lot of prayers of thanks for your nimble fingers, but I had no idea I'd ever had the opportunity of expressing my gratitude in person. He said, "Were all the panels there?" I said, "Well, I appreciate your concern. And to be honest with you, no, they weren't. Of the 18 panels I was supposed to have in that parachute, had only 15 good ones. 3 of the panels were torn. But it wasn't your fault, it was mine. I ejected from that F-4 Phantom jet at high speed, close to the ground. I was well outside the envelope of that parachute." I said, "But let me ask you a question. Do you keep track of all the parachutes you pack? Do you know of all the lives you've saved?" Guy said, "No." Now, this is the most important part of the conversation. Maybe the most important thing I say this morning. Think it deals directly with the continuity, the unity, the trust that we have with each other in the GGBC. Here's what he said. He said, "No, I don't keep track of all the parachutes I pack. It's enough gratification for me just to know that I've served." Here's a sailor in the bowels of this aircraft carrier. The guy stands at a long wooden table, weaves the shrouds and folds the silk panels of this parachute, passes them along one after another, while the Top Gun zooms around the sky at the speed of sound and couldn't have cared less about the guy down there in the hole. Until one day my parachute came along and he packed mine up for me and saved my life. So the question becomes, gang, who packs your parachute? Who do you look to for strength in time of need? Mine was pretty well packed. My physical parachute, 15 of 18 panels, my mental parachute, my emotional parachute, my spiritual parachute, pretty well in place. Got my parachute packed, same place you did, early in life. I grew up in a tiny town in Kansas, farm kid. Never been out of the 4 states of Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa. At age, got my parachute packed there, obviously. Mom, dad, big sister, 2 little brothers. My mom taught me an awful lot about forgiveness. My father taught me an awful lot about discipline. Forgiveness and discipline would need both of those things when I got in that prison camp. At age 17, I went to the Naval Academy at Annapolis. I pledged to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. And it wasn't easy, but I learned a lot there. Got my parachute packed too, okay? Don't miss the metaphor. Parachute packing is giving of yourself with asking nothing in return. See, it's not a trade. It's not, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. That's not it. Parachute packing is unconditional, okay? It's a gift. So we had a lot of parachute packers at the Naval Academy, and they were officers and chaplains and other midshipmen, and the superintendent, we call him the soup, would stand up in big pep rallies and clench his fist. You could see the veins running his brow. He would say, you guys can do anything you set your minds to do. And we did. We produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners in 4 years. Best of all, beat Army 4 times straight. I graduated from Annapolis, married my high school sweetheart, lovely blonde girl under the arch of swords. Military wedding, picture perfect. What a beautiful day that was. Flight training, Pensacola, Florida, Beeville, Texas, from Reading, Mississippi, where John McCain was my flight instructor. Out to San Diego, California, where I flew the first adversarial flight for the Top Gun school. Man, what exciting times. Zooming around in those jets. I was assigned the F-4 Phantom jet, a high altitude supersonic interceptor. In fact, I wasn't even called a fighter pilot. I was called an interceptor pilot. And I trained in a spacesuit, you know, the big helmet and carried around my air conditioner in a briefcase. And incidentally, one of the guys I went through flight training with was Irv Williams. Just found out this morning, listening to you guys and gals. I'll tell you some more stories about Irv. We call him Scurvy Irvy. He doesn't like that. that was a call sign for a while, Scurvy. What a wonderful man this guy is. I just love him to death. I was in the same prison cell with Irv Williams and Mike Christian as well. So there I was, hanging in the parachute, looking up at that canopy holding me in the sky, looking down at the unknown. They're shooting at me. The audacity of this enemy. Don't they know I'm the Top Gun? Haven't they heard? Haven't they read the press? I'm bulletproof. I'm the guy that always stands tall. I'm the one that's never afraid. They're shooting. I'll tell you this. When you're dodging bullets, it's tough to come up with a long-range plan. So what do you do? I don't know. All I can tell you is what I did. I took a deep breath as that Marine Corps gunny sergeant taught me on the rifle range. Try to calm myself. Let about half of that breath out. Bowed my head. And I said a prayer. I asked for a little extra strength that day from above. And I prayed for my wife. Remember the lady I had married under the Arch of Swords? See, this was my war, not hers. And yet at the end of the Vietnam War, she would feel more pain from that war than I. Hit the ground, sunk about, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet into a rice paddy, in the mud of a rice paddy. Descended upon by, it seemed like 100 of the enemy. They hauled me into the prison camp in Hanoi. I was tortured for 2 days and tossed into that little cell. The one I described to you from the very beginning of my little chat. Wasn't kidding you an inch. Let me tell you about my physical state at that time in my life. Bleeding from 4 open wounds, no medical care. Getting really skinny, not a whole lot to eat. 2 little bowls of rice a day. And sometimes a little broth. I didn't have enough meat in a year to fill a coffee cup. I was beginning to develop these boils. We never really understood where these boils came from, but every Every POW started getting these boils all over my face, all over the rest of my body. Every cell on my body seemed to hurt. I remember not being able to blink my eyes without something somewhere hurting on my body. And all that was the good news. The bad news was my mental state. I'd given up. I'd given in. I'd surrendered. Fighter pilots are not supposed to surrender. That's not in our DNA. That's not in our training. And I felt very guilty about that. How in the world can I ever go back to my family, my home, my fellow fighter pilots, and admit to them that I had failed so miserably? And with that mindset of guilt, of inferiority, of missing the mark, of not accomplishing the mission, I paced back and forth and heard a little cricket in the far corner of my prison cell. Being a farm kid, knew what a cricket sounded like. Yet the longer I listened, the more rhythmic this chirp became, and I thought, that's a pretty educated little critter. Maybe I can train that little cricket to sing. Walked over to the corner of my prison cell, no cricket, but a little piece of wire about 4 inches long poked through a hole at the base of my cell wall and scratching on my concrete floor, making this chirping noise like a cricket. Are you with me? And can you imagine what might be going through your mind with this state of guilt and defeat? I'm watching the little wire. My first thought, it can't be the enemy. They're not sophisticated enough to trick me. If it's not the enemy, it's got to be an American. If it's an American, it's got to be a fighter pilot like me. Because that's who's in these prison camps. It's an air war over North Vietnam. Pilots are being shot down and captured. Got a prison camp full of fighter pilots. Boy, would I like to talk to the fighter pilot. We can tell some stories. But I'll bet that guy's tougher than I am. I'll bet he didn't cry when they tortured him like I did. I'm losing interest now. It'd be nice, but hey, life's short. Got other things to do. I don't want to really expose myself and my inadequacy to anybody else. So if I can crawl over here in the corner of this prison cell and wait, surely in 3 or 4 years, the Marines will break down the gates and I'll be set free. I'll never have to take another risk the rest of my life. And the wire kept scratching and I kept sweating. And finally, I got up the guts to reach down and grab that little wire and tug. And the wire tugged back. I tugged again, it disappeared. The wire came back about an hour later. This time the wire had a note wrapped around the end of it. The note was written on a dirty piece of toilet paper, just blobs on this wadded up piece of toilet paper. I could barely make it out, but it said, memorize this code, then eat this note. The code was a 5x5 box of the alphabet. 5 lines, 5 rows. A, B, C, D, E, then F, G, H, I, J. Numbers down the side and across the top, indicated in the letter would be represented by 2 numbers, number of the line, then the number of the row. Got it? A, first line, first row, 1 tug, 1 more tug. Z, 5th line. You think your email is cumbersome. You try this. No delete key. But it worked. It worked. This silly, archaic, cumbersome code became our language. More than that, it became our lifeblood. It was absolutely vital that we communicate with the other prisoners. And here's the interesting part. It wasn't the words. It wasn't the top secret military information we were passing around. That wasn't the life-saving property of communication. It was the simple validation of another human being. Because in those prison cells, when it was dark, and it was in a lot of the camps, and you were alone, some guys were in solitary confinement for 4.5 years. When it was dark and you were alone, you'd lose track. You wouldn't know what was a real memory, what's a hallucination. You need a baseline. You need to validate your sanity. The simple tugging on a wire. To have that wire tugged back. And two things. Number one, somebody is responding to something I am doing physically, thus I exist. I'm real. Number two, somebody cares. In this day and age, you and I would probably argue we can now pass a packet of data from one handheld machine around the world to another handheld machine. I can tell you this. Your purpose, perhaps, your raison d'etre, the reason you're on this globe is to validate other people. It's the old adage, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. On the other end of the wire, Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker, fighter pilot extraordinary, astronaut candidate, better than that. Here's another parachute packer. He'd been there for 2 years when I showed up. Had spent a good long number of hours, weeks, and months piecing together little bits of wire, stuffing them out a hole in his cell across a storeroom between our 2 prison cells. Over the boxes, around the shovels, through the ropes, into the hole in my cell wall, 14 feet away. And we started to communicate with that code. Shoemaker said, "You've just joined the finest team you'll ever play on." He said, "We have leadership in this prison camp that, bar none, is the best you will ever see. Our leaders can't see us. They can't hear us. They can't talk to us. They can't fire us. They can't hire us. They can't give us a bonus or Friday afternoon off. The only communication that they have is to tug on wires and tap on walls in our communication. And yet you will see they're the best leaders ever. They've turned this thing around. Jim Stockdale, what a guy. He was the leader of our camp for a while. Stockdale said, there is no whining in this prison camp. You are not on the defensive here. We are on the offensive. And we will pursue this war till our last dying breath. So pull up your big boy pants. We got a war to fight. I'm a lieutenant junior grade, okay? I'm one of the youngest and most junior guys in that prison camp. And I'm wondering what's going on in the mind of this leader, okay? The whole idea that we're not on the defensive, but it worked. Here's a statistic you might be interested in. A study was done of all the Vietnam veterans. 30.6% had post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, you know what it is. Of the prisoners of war, 4% of us have PTSD. And it's primarily the guys who were shot down near the end of the war, were not tortured, and were only there for a few weeks or a month or two. Figure that out. Well, the psychiatrists that study these things tell us it was because of that leadership that we had and that team that we put together. Incredible. Well, I thought about that wife a lot. Remember the lady I had married under the Arch of Swords? I would fast forward my mind every day just to be with her mentally and plan the rest of our lives together. The war finally ended. We traded 10,000 of the bad guys for 591 of us. Flew out of there in a big C-141. What a beautiful day that was to be released from that prison camp. Right into the Air Force Base in the Philippines. Ran down the ladder of that airplane and across the tarmac to the first telephone I could find to call. But she had gone. I called my parents back in Kansas. What has happened to my wife? He said, well, she hung on for 5 years. Then just 3 months ago, your wife filed for divorce. She's engaged to another guy. Isn't that life? You know, just about the time the pandemic ends, you know, and we think we're on the precipice, you know, we think we've made it over this hurdle, and here comes another one. And I'm laying in that hospital bed in Chicago, the Great Lakes Naval Hospital, thinking to myself, you know, I've just been through nearly 6 years of challenge. I can face this one as well. So pull up your big boy pants, Plum. Let's get on with this. The story has a happy ending. My co-pilot came back to the States, went back to flying Navy jet fighters. Some guys never learn. That's not fair. I continued in the Navy, and I flew A4s and A7s and finally F-18s before I retired from the Navy. And now I fly a couple of little airplanes, a PT-19 Fairchild. I'm sure Red Sharp father has some hours in that one. I have an experimental airplane as well. It's called a Long Easy, and I terrorize the skies of Southern California in those two airplanes, so watch out. Shoemaker, the guy on End of the Wire, remember him? He retired as a 2-star admiral. Great guy. My ex-wife married the guy she was engaged to. They're living happily ever after, and I remarried a wonderful lady, and we have 4 kids and 4 grandkids, and live a very happy life, as a matter of fact. So what's the message here? Why did our lives magically connect on Veterans Day 2020? You'll never be prisoners of war. You don't need to know this stuff. I hope and pray none of you ever get in one of those 8-foot boxes, but we all get in the 8-inchers, especially in times like the COVID, okay? And we can't see past that 8-inch box. What do you do? How do you handle that? I'm convinced if you can get outside yourself, okay, kick down what's left of your comfort zone, grab a wire, tug on that little wire, pack some parachutes, apply the very basics of life, and you can do anything you set your minds to do. Hey, great being with you all. My salute to all the veterans. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Everybody can unmute themselves now. Give Captain Plumb a round of applause.
Right.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, Charlie, I don't know what to say. I'm just kind of dumbfounded here, probably like everybody else. Patricia, what you want to start? You want to ask some questions?
Yes, Charlie. One of my favorite stories was I asked you, what was your first speech?
My very first speech. Well, I was there for about 4 years, and there was a raid on one of the camps. The Green Berets raided one of the camps, and it was not successful. I was in a camp about 5-10 miles down the road. We could hear what was going on. But it did 2 things for us. Even though it didn't extract us from the prison camp, it was a great morale boost, because finally we recognized that they knew who we were and where we were, and they cared about us, because for years we wondered if anybody really even remembered that we were there. So the other part of that was it forced the enemy to put us all into downtown Hanoi to protect us, because they had the Green Berets had raided an outlying camp. So we found ourselves all together in the Hanoi Hilton. And I was in a cell that was 20 feet wide and 30 feet long, and there were 57 of us in that cell. We each had 14 inches of bed space. The good news was we were together, okay? And we could actually talk to each other in a voice. We could actually teach each other courses we'd learned in college. And one of the guys had been a Toastmaster. And so he knew the workings of a Toastmaster club. I know that several of you have been in Toastmasters. And so we set up a little Toastmasters group, okay? We commissioned the Hanoi Toastmasters Club. And so you had to post a guard at the door to make sure that no guard was going to catch us. And so we would go through, each one of us would, stand up with a speech. Talk about a captive audience. some of the toughest speeches I've ever made, were in front of that group. Well, the first speech is called the icebreaker. Okay, that's when you get together and you talk to each other, a little biography. Here's me and where and that's the icebreaker. And so everybody got up and they said, I was born here, and so I decided I'm going to make a little different speech. So here is my very first presentation, the icebreaker from the Hanoi Toastmasters Club. The scene is a courtroom in heaven. The date is the 19th of May of 1967 at 9:30 in the morning. God stands at his huge desk, and he brings the gavel down on the desk, and he says, "Next case." St. Peter at his lectern under the big desk looks up at God, and he licks his thumb, and he turns the page on this great big ledger, and he said, "God, we got to be quick on this one. Ben, this guy's in real trouble. We have to make some decisions." And God looks down and strokes his long white beard and says, "Okay, go ahead, tell me about this guy." Well, he grew up in Kansas, a farm kid. Yeah, he used to tease his big sister when she came home from a date. He'd hide behind a lilac tree. When they were kissing, he would jump out from behind the lilac tree. And God said, "Well, has he ever been in trouble?" He said, well, he actually was arrested when he was 12 years old, riding his motor scooter on the highway. Okay, what else? St. Peter says, "Well, he's in real trouble now. He went to the Naval Academy, graduated from there, married his high school sweetheart, and is flying combat missions in Vietnam right now. He's flown 74 combat missions." God says, "Well, what's the deal? What's the problem?" St. Peter says, well, Lord, just a few minutes ago, he was on a big target just south of Hanoi, the capital city. He just got hit by a surface-to-air missile, and it's burning his airplane. And just a few seconds ago, God, he ejected from his airplane. He is now tumbling through the sky. He is now just a fireball up there heading for the ground. What shall we do? God strokes his beard, looks down at St. Peter, says, "Okay, St. Peter, pop the chute." And that's it.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, Captain, I have a question. You mentioned Irv Williams. Haven't seen him in years. Is he still around in San Francisco?
Scurvy Irvy is alive and well, and he's still in the Bay Area. I see him at the reunions. We're both naval aviators, part of a group we call the Golden Eagles. He's also a member of the Bohemian Club. Many of you know the Bohemian Club, and I see him up there occasionally as well. But he's alive and well and doing great.
Be great.
Irv and I, I'm sorry?
Yeah, it'd be great to see him.
I'll tell him you guys said hello. Irv and I were on a mission just north of Hanoi, near the China border, and I got shot up, and then I got into a dogfight with 3 MiGs, and I had all these 3 MiGs cornered on my 6 o'clock position. So I was very happy to get back to the ship. That's another story. Got back to the ship, and on a single engine landing on this aircraft carrier, and I was so happy to be back aboard the aircraft carrier, because I literally, it was totally shot up. So I went down to the radio room, and the skipper said, "Got some good news and bad news." I said, "Okay, what's the good news?" He said, "Well, your buddy Irv Williams was shot down today." Now, incidentally, he said, "But what a hero Irv Williams was. He pulled his 2-way radio out from his pack, and he's calling the MiGs on the other guys. He was telling, 'Hey, you got to make it 5 o'clock, make it 7 o'clock. Okay, look out, here comes a missile.' And he's calling, he says, 'We're going to put him in for a Silver Star.'" Well, fast forward about 3 months later, I'm in the prison cell next to Irv Williams, and I'm tapping on the wall, as we did in some cases. "Hey, Irv, congratulations." He said, "What? Why, Charlie? What happened?" He said, "Well, you're a hero now. About about hanging in the parachute and talking on the radio and calling the position of the MiGs for all the other flights. He said, "You kidding me?" He said, "Man, I tore the antenna off that radio, threw it one way and threw it the other, and I never did that." I said, "Irv, they're going to put you in for a Silver Star." It took us several weeks to figure this out, that my backseater, my co-pilot, was back there looking back at the 3 MiGs I had cornered at my 6, reaching around to the transmit button to talk to me. He was actually pushing the transmit button of the radio to talk to the rest of the world. He was actually calling the MiGs for me, saying, "Okay, you got one 5 o'clock coming to 7 o'clock, missiles away. Look out, Charlie." And they all thought it was Irv. Irv said, "Hey, Charlie, I won't tell if you don't."
Yeah.
Irv Williams, today Irv wears the Silver Star.
Yeah.
Great guy. Another question?
What happened to Christian? Mike Christian.
Mike Christian, okay, the story is true. I was in a prison cell with Mike Christian when all this happened. Okay, and we did a lot of little patriotic things like this, but he was one of the most patriotic guys I know. He died a few years ago. And he would stitch. He made a needle. He made a needle out of a piece of bamboo, if you can believe it. And he would take threads, from our pajamas. They gave us these pajamas to wear. He would with these threads and his little bamboo needle, he would sew American flag inside of his t-shirt. And it's true. We would pledge our allegiance, every morning to his shirt. And they found it. They discovered his shirt, and that was against the camp regulations. And so they hauled him out of there and beat him up pretty good. Finally sent him back, and he was bloody and bruised and kind of despondent in a way. We tried to kind of bring him around, and all he wanted to do was crawl over in the corner, and we knew he was over there, and we didn't know exactly what had happened. And we went up close to find out he had his needle out and his thread out. He's sewing another American flag in that t-shirt, so we'd have something to salute. Yeah, it's a great story. And I'm happy that you're telling that, Joel. It is. He was certainly one of the most patriotic guys that I know.
Charlie, will you talk us through John McCain's heroics while incarcerated, from the standpoint of when
Sure.
they found out who he was, that they wanted to send him home, and he said, how did that all work out?
John McCain was shot down 5 months after I was. I was the first guy to identify him in the prison camp, and he had 7 broken bones. They were twisting his broken bones. When they found out that his father was St. Pac, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, Admiral J.S. McCain, they called him the Crown Prince, okay? And it didn't go well for him. But one of the toughest guys I know. His cell was right across the path from the sewer house. The sewer house was a brick building, and small. It was probably 10 feet by 10 feet. And you go in there and dump your bucket into this hole in the ground. That was the sewer house. The bad news was the sewer house would stink like crazy. I mean, you had to hold your breath. I mean, if you wanted your sinuses cleaned out, walk into the sewer house, okay? You can imagine bugs and rats. And so, the good news was the guards didn't like the sewer house either, and they would not follow us in there. When we found out that they wouldn't follow, it's the only time 24/7 that they're watching us, except when we walk into the sewer house. It's a natural. We'll make a communication system out of the sewer house. And so we did. We designated different cracks in the bricks, okay, to be the P.O. box of the different prison cells. And you'd write a little note out on a piece of toilet paper and ink made from bricks or brick dust or ashes. Fold the note up, put it in your belt loop, and walk into the sewer house with your bucket. Dump your bucket, pull the note out of your belt loop, put it in the P.O. box that you wanted it to go to, and walk on out. It was a thing of beauty. Worked really well. Until one of my buddies was walking down the path, going towards the sewer house with his bucket. He's got his little note in his belt loop. As he turned the corner in front of McCain's cell, he dropped the note out of his belt loop. It fell on the dirt. I mean, this is serious stuff. If they find out about our communication system, a lot of guys are going to be tortured. We're going to be compromised completely. McCain is standing on his homemade crutches, peeking out a crack in his door. He sees what's happening. Immediately, he starts pounding on the door, cussing at the top of his lungs, distracted the guard. The guard went over and beat up John McCain while my buddy picked up his note and walked on into the sewer house. So that's the kind of guy. Now, while his dad was still sink packed and things got a little better. Matter of fact, I brought a couple of little things to show you guys. Our wives were back here petitioning our governments and governments around the world to put pressure on the Vietnamese to stop torturing their husbands. And they sold these little bracelets, and many of you probably know what this is because a lot of people wore these bracelets. There were over 2 million of these things sold to finance their trip to Paris and other places. And so treatment began to improve. We didn't know any of this, of course. And we didn't know why treatment improved, but it did. The torture, this is like 4 years after I was there, torture stopped. Food got a little bit better, and they decided to send a couple of POWs home. Well, McCain's dad was in charge of the Vietnam War. They said, they went to John and said, McCain, we're sending you home early. Pack your stuff, get on the bus that's going to the airport. McCain said, in your dreams, you're sending me home early. I would never embarrass my father like that. I'd never give up on the other prisoners of war who were sick and injured. Truth was, he was one of the most injured guys I knew. I would never give up on those guys. My buddy, you take your idea and shove it. And he got into a lot of trouble. He was put in solitary confinement for another 2 years because he refused to go home early. So one of the toughest guys I've ever met, John McCain.
Tell the story, Charlie. Thank you.
You bet.
Bill Buchanan has a question.
Captain, thanks very much for a fascinating story. When I was a platoon commander over in Vietnam, one of the favorite aircraft that we could call in, the Forward Air Controller could call in, is the F-4, and that has remained as my favorite aircraft in my spectrum of aircraft. Anyway, when we would call in a airstrike on an enemy unit, usually a bigger unit than us, we could hear in the high overhead an unearthly howl. And then I would know that it wasn't an A4, it was an F4. And I could never figure out what made out that unearthly howl. Almost sounded like a wolf howling in a distant ridge. And it used to scare the hell out of me, much less the enemy soldiers. What caused that howling? I got another question for you just after that too.
Okay. Thanks, Bill, and thanks for your service, and happy birthday yesterday.
Thank you.
My son-in-law is a Marine.
Oh, great.
I tried to teach my daughter better. Just kidding.
Too late.
No. I love the guy. He said, Marine Corps is he says a branch of the Navy, the men's department. The howl, and incidentally, I did a lot of close air support, and you guys loved this. But it was really the scariest missions I ever had were supporting you guys, because I knew I had to get close to be effective, but not too close. And we would fly lower when we were involved in close air support, and even sometimes fly into our own bomb blasts just to be more accurate. And you love to hear the F-4s come. That howl was, of course, we had two J79 General Electric jet engines. And on the back of the engine, different from the A4 or the other airplanes, was a nozzle. And that nozzle would close and open up depending on how much thrust you wanted. And if your afterburner, when the afterburner was lighted, the nozzle would be full open and the fuel would go right in there, and the afterburners would go. And so that the howl that you heard was primarily that nozzle in the back of those two big jet engines. So
you sure saved our bacon many a time. And by the way, I'm looking at a row of medals here: Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, Purple Hearts, Air Medals. I get the impression those were really well earned, despite the story you told about William. By the way, one last question for you. I got a ton of books on my desk here at home, and I finally realized the other day I probably won't be able to get through them. I'm 78 years old. That's kind of a sobering thought. But anyway, one of them is, I don't know if you can see this or not. It's called Tap Code. Are you familiar with that book? Should I put this at the top of the pile?
I am not familiar with that book. That's really interesting. Has it been written recently? I mean, I know most of it.
It's Colonel Carlisle.
Who's the author?
Harris. Do you remember that? I mean, do you remember this? Forward by Colonel Lee Ellis, retired.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's about the Tap Code in Hanoi Hilton, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Lee Ellis is one of the few other POWs who's on the speaking circuit, as I am.
Okay.
And Air Force guy, a great guy, and so I'm sure he had something to do with that. But yeah, that's really pretty interesting. I'm going to look for that book. It's
sure. Thank you very much for your presentation and your service.
You bet. Thank you for your service.
I have one other comment. Talking about Irv Williams, just reminds me of our great member, Dick Poley. And I'm sure you had a great association with Dick. I wonder if you just might comment a little about Dick Poley.
I'm sorry, I don't recognize that name. Tell me a little bit more about him.
He was former member of the Breakfast Club, great member, and I just assumed you knew him, but I guess not. Okay.
He was the commander of Treasure Island.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure that I ever met him, but I'm glad you guys have and continue to have some military members in your club. I mean, as you probably know, we speak a little bit different language, and it's a very close association with other military guys, especially Vietnam veterans.
All right, Charlie, we have one question here from Tim Durkin, and then I think we're getting close to 9 o'clock. So why don't we let Patricia wrap it up after that? Tim's question is, can you ask about the effect of Jane Fonda's visit?
It's a very good question, and I'm happy to address that because Jane Fonda, to most veterans, was this evil lady that came over there and sat at the gun mountain and was anti-war. That was her whole purpose, or whatever her purpose was. But and most veterans that I talk to really hate her with a passion, and wonder why I don't hate her as a passion, or the other POWs. Talk to any of the POWs, or go to the POW website. We have a website called 3SN. Okay, and this is when you have a 4-place formation of airplanes. The missing man formation is number 3. He peels away as the missing man, and many of you have seen that at funerals and whatnot. So our website is 3SN. That means that the missing man is back in, because they did the missing man for me and a lot of other guys when they thought we were dead. And so we're back in the formation. Okay, so Jane Fonda did come to Hanoi, and I was in the same camp that she came to. I never saw her. Lucky about that. The story goes, and if you read on the internet, that she got some guys killed. She never got anybody killed. As far as I know, she never had anybody even hurt. Okay, and so while we certainly were not happy to see her there, it wasn't a court-martial offense, to do it. I mean, in fact, realistically, and maybe ideally, okay, we felt like we were in uniform to protect her right to dissent. And when you spend that much time in a communist country, you realize how vital that is, to be able to protest. They don't do that in Vietnam. They didn't. In communist countries, they don't have protests. Those are riots. They put those down with machine guns and tanks. We don't do that in this country. And so we felt like we were absolutely defending her right to dissent. What we didn't really understand was why she would come to a foreign country, you know, and be part of them against us. We thought that was kind of didn't have much class. Ironically, I have so many stories to tell you guys. Ironically, the week before I was in the prison camp, Henry Fonda came aboard as a USO guy. Okay, and we had him in my ready room, and what a patriotic guy Henry Fonda was. And he was so disappointed with his daughter when she came over to the other side. But to answer your question, and to all you veterans, we don't hate Jane Fonda. We think she's an opportunist. We think she didn't really know what she was doing or how much it would hurt the war effort, but nobody ever got killed or even tortured because Jane Fonda was there. Incidentally, you know, we're running out of time, and I'm really sorry about that. But if you have other questions or want to tap into my life, charlieplumb.com is my website, and I answer all the emails. In fact, on Veterans Day, I'll be up late tonight answering emails.
You know, I have something that isn't a question, Charlie, but a thank you. You were on a Dan Burris at the beginning of this pandemic webinar, and people were complaining because they couldn't go outside, etc. And you laughed and said, compared to your life, because Dan asked you about your life, and you looked at him and laughed and said, "You all have Netflix." And that changed my whole attitude. And not that I love this, but I just think about what you said, and it has been a guidepost for this. We have nothing to complain about.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate that. And yeah, that was a fun little thing Dan and I did. And it's right. You know, I mean, we are so blessed in this country. We have so many opportunities and so many things to do. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you picked up on that message. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, Charlie, when we listen to your story, anything that we experience is a mild inconvenience.
Yes.
Now, as a concluding remark from you, I know you went back to Vietnam and you had a conversation with the commandant of the camp. Would you like to end your remarks with that story?
The professor at the University of Hanoi, in fact, the head of the history department there, decided that he'd like for me to go back to Vietnam. And so I took my family back there, my wife and three of our children, as a matter of fact, to Hanoi. And I met with the other fighter pilots that I had fought with. And then I met the camp commander, the guy who was in charge of all of our torture. And it was really interesting because he was in his late 80s. And I thought, well, maybe the guy wants to apologize. This is a picture of one of the fighter pilots. This guy had 7 kills. And he had a total, you pilots in the crowd will appreciate this. He had a total of 250 hours in airplanes and had 7 kills. And as you see here, he gave me one of his scarves. And he was one of the guys that I fought against. So the camp commander, I went to his home, and the guy, I thought he was going to apologize to me for what I'd been through. And he said, I was your warden from 1968 to 1972. And I've got to tell you that it was my finest achievement to keep you healthy and happy while you were here. Bubba, it's me. You don't recognize me. I talked to the guy for probably 45 minutes or an hour. I said, what about the torture? What about the scars that I had? What about my missing testicle? Tell me how I got that. He said, no, that wasn't torture. That was punishment. You probably weren't following the camp regulations. Well, the camp regulations were part of writing anti-war notes to our senators and congressmen back in the States, and making tapes, to the other combatants, telling them to give up. So he never ever admitted. In fact, we spent 11 days in Vietnam and never ran into anybody who knew that Americans were tortured in those prison camps. The very last day I was there, it sent my family home. I was in a park, just relaxing in a park in downtown Hanoi. and I saw a lady selling postcards. She had, a bag strapped over her shoulder, and she's missing her left leg totally from the waist down, no leg, just her black pajamas were tied in a knot. She's on crutches, selling postcards. Want to buy a postcard? Want to buy a postcard? He's speaking great English. I said, I'll buy a postcard. How about sitting down here on this park bench and telling me your story? She was flattered that I asked her about her story. I said, how'd you lose your leg? She said, oh, linebacker 2. Linebacker 2 was the secret code name of the B-52 bombings in Christmas of 1972. I said, what date? She said, 24 December 1972. Yep, that's linebacker 2. I said, you speak great English. You're out here selling postcards. You could be an interpreter. You could be a docent in one of the museums. Why are you selling postcards to eke out a living? She said, oh no, my government would never give me a permit for that. She said, I'm an invalid, and my government does not want me representing them. Here's 2 Homo sapiens, okay, about the same age. She was probably smarter than I. We'd both been scarred by the Vietnam War. One has 2 airplanes, a big sailboat, drives a big car, lives a life of luxury, and the other is selling postcards in a park. And there's only one difference, I think, in her life and mine, is that I live in freedom, and she doesn't.
Golden Gate Breakfast Club. Thank you, Captain Charlie Plumb.
What a great way to end the meeting. Thank you, Charlie. And happy Veterans Day to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
That concludes our meeting for today.